I'm heading into this weekend with a mild. It's not a sunburn; it's a suntan. It wasn't really. I wasn't out in the sun that much yesterday, but I got a chance to walk for a few hours the Twin Falls County Fair and really enjoyed myself. A little later in the program today, I'm going to share some interviews with you. I stopped in a couple of the barns, talked to some people about what they were doing, anywhere from quilting to model trains to collecting money to provide relief for the victims of the soda fire, as well as getting an overall outlook from the state's agriculture director about what we can expect with weather over the next year and planning for the worst case scenarios. So those things are on the way a little later in the program today, but I do have a lot of things I need to talk about before we call it a wrap. And I'll point out right off the top of the show, I don't know yet because we haven't seen, I just have a gut feeling that perhaps there are a great many people who tune in and listen to us and that, we have a fairly wide audience. I have people calling me sometimes off air saying they've been listening from, as far away as near Sun Valley and the like. So I know there are a lot of people out there who tune in because they really find this to be the voice of truth, or at least an attempt to get a lot closer to it than most people in local media happen to be doing. 8 minutes after 8 o'clock, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310. KLIX and newsradio1310.com. That means online you can listen to us anywhere all over the world by clicking on that Listen Live button. So I got back from the fair yesterday, had my dinner, took care of a few things around the house, sat down to check some emails just before bed, and I had an email message from a fellow at the local newspaper, apparently one of the executives. All right. I guess that means out of the half a dozen people who still work out of the building, yes, he's one of the three executives. But he dropped me a line, and he said someone had sent him the video from yesterday morning's program where I criticized the newspaper for scheduling a forum to talk about the refugee resettlement program. They'll never claim that they're listening, and they may be right. They listen to national public radio on their drive into work, which really could be called National Socialist Radio. It's truly state-run media, and it's funded by you, the taxpayers. The taxpayers fund nothing of what we do here at News Radio 1310 KLIX. So, they'd never claim to listen anyway, even if they did. But he sent me an email message and said that he and the editor would like to come on the program, like to come on my show, to discuss the refugee resettlement panel that's coming up, which they're inviting the public to take part in. My first thought was, well, they recognize where all of the ears are. They recognize that if they want to get their message out, it's certainly not going to happen in their newspaper. It's going to happen here because I have a much, much wider audience than they have a circulation. So number one, there's an acknowledgement of who the big dog is in town when they say that. But what also I got thinking about was they really need to have somebody on that panel providing some evidence from the contrarian point of view. Because right now, all of the people who are going to be involved with that panel, as I told him in one of the replies I sent back, we bounced a few emails back and forth. I'm not having them in, by the way. Newspaper people think they know how to run everything in media, all media. Then you put them down by a microphone. Well, we'd like to thank you for inviting us to come by today, and we want to talk a little bit about our panel discussion coming up. And they're not broadcasters. They think they know what we're doing here, but they've got no clue. So they're not going to come in. I'll put it that way. It's not in the cards at this point. However, I said they really needed to add, and I gave them some names of some people I know who are on this committee on the local level who have done a great deal of digging. I mean, they've done their research. They're like the old-fashioned investigative reporters. They've gone out and they've found various pieces of information that the public really does need to know about that don't get reported in the local newspaper. So the guy wrote me back and said, no, this is not going to be a debate. This is going to be an opportunity for the public to get its questions answered. Well, who's answering the questions? The religious people who are actually the churches who are actually getting a buck from this. In other words, they're getting a payment for helping participate in the program. The Refugee Resettlement Center as well is going to have a spokesman there as well, so that they can also tell you it's a wonderful program, and by the way, ka-ching, ka-ching. You're also going to have some people, obviously, from the college who benefit from this, ka-ching, ka-ching, and a representative from the State Department where they help administer this program through the United Nations. Now, all of these people will not present you with any alternative evidence that there are some obviously downsides to this program, or could be potentially. That won't happen, right? That will not happen. That was my point. So in other words, what they're doing is they're advocating for this cause. And I pointed out that's not supposed to be journalism. Just like last Sunday in their newspaper, they were advocating for the Latin conquest of Jerome. They didn't bother to interview anyone and say, well, has this also had some negative impacts? Do we have perhaps additional crime? Or have we had a rise in the number of people who are on social services? They didn't ask those questions. It was rah, 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 cheerleading for what's going on there. And that's exactly what they're doing with the refugee resettlement program. That's exactly what they're trying to do with this panel discussion. It's a sales job. They're trying to tell the public, there's nothing to see here. Come hear us tell you that. There's nothing to see here. And isn't this great? And here's some success stories. And by the way, we're making a lot of money. No, we didn't say that. They don't want anyone on that panel who's going to sit down and say, well, okay, I've done some research, and there may be a downside to all of this. Do you understand what they're attempting to do? Again, this is not about journalism. It's not about giving you the facts. And then you could make your own educated decision. It's selectively offering what they want you to see and hear. That's exactly why they thought they could come in here, and they thought they would just sit here and spout off and that I'm supposed to be a human microphone stand. I'm sorry, that's not how it works. If they were to come in here, they're going to get their ears pinned back. We'll tell you that right now. There is something that I think really galls the American people, and it may be people not just on the American right, but also on the American left. When it comes to mainstream media anymore, do your job. Stop being the cheerleader for whatever liberal cause you find du jour. Coming up on 8:14, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And, of course, you can also reach me by telephone and email. I should point out you can reach me by email by going to bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. That's bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. And I would also mention the telephone number, 736-0300. That's 736-0300. We have a caller with us. You're up next. You're on the air on Top Story.
Yeah, good morning, Bill. I think you ought to enter into negotiations, maybe get a couple of guys on your side or a couple of girls, whatever it might be. And I think you could make mincemeat of the pipsqueak little editor and whoever he brought on with you. So I would love to hear it because, quite frankly, I don't think it'd be a fair fight, and I'm betting on you.
Yeah, well, and I'd really enjoy having a girl on each side. Thank you very much for the call, sir. 736-0300, 736-0300. How is it that they believe that the public doesn't see what they're up to? How is it? What are they living in? A bubble somewhere? Do they roll to work in the bubble? And when they occasionally have to go out and cover a story, well, most of the newspaper is just a collection of AP reports and the like anymore. But when they go home, do they roll home in a bubble? Do they never come out of that bubble and actually talk to real and regular people? Or is it just an echo chamber inside the bubble where they all, hello, fellow traveler, how are you today? Liberalism is a self-evident truth, isn't it? Why, yes, it is. And all of those people outside the bubble who don't believe it, well, those dumb dummies, we need to educate them. That's the word you always hear from liberals. We need to educate the public, as if you're not educated. Most of them, I'm not aware that they have any more degrees piled high than anybody else who's out there. It's just that they have this emotional response. It's like the photograph of the little boy drowned on the Turkish beach. You just heard about that in the Fox newscast at 8 o'clock. Now the British have suddenly said, oh, gosh, it's so terrible. We're going to have to allow these people to overrun our country. Well, okay, they've already overrun our country, but let's let them just come and, rattle the rubble a little bit. Here's the thing. Planned Parenthood kills 600,000 babies a year. And I think there's another 1.4 million babies that are killed in this country through infanticide at other facilities every year. So you got 2 million babies in this country killed every year. There's a photograph of one Syrian migrant child drowned on a beach in Turkey, and everyone says, oh, we are so cruel. We have been so wrong. Oh, how did we fail that child? I don't know. I said it yesterday. How did the Turks fail that child? Why didn't the Turks make sure they took in that family and provided them with housing and food and a job? Well, that's because other Turks wouldn't approve of that, especially when the other Turks are struggling to maintain their housing and to feed themselves. It wouldn't go over very well. But these are their co-religionists. They're not even stepping up. The Muslim world stretches from North Africa all the way out to Southeast Asia. Clearly, there could be people who are more culturally attuned who could be taking these folks in. 17 minutes after 8 o'clock. Bill Colley with you. Top story on News Radio 1310 KLIX at newsradio1310.com, 736-0300. Let's try our callers, and you're up next. You're on the air.
Yeah, Bill, speaking of this kind of thing that happens with our government and these people that think they know better than everybody, there's a poor guy up in the apple orchard, the old apple orchards up in Washington. And you know how if your parents are picking the apples and you're running around in the shade underneath the apple trees, wouldn't that be a good scenario for your children? But if they accidentally happen to put an apple, one apple, into a case, a box, wherever it is, then the Department of Labor apparently somehow found out about this, and they made this guy pay $16,000 because one apple had been put into a box by a child was like 10 or 11. But you see, the same mindset murders so many children a day. If you're lucky enough to get out of the womb in this country, then they'll protect you. Make sure you wear your seatbelt. Make sure we protect them from doing anything that might train them and teach them anything.
Well, we have a lot of people who have their priorities in all of the wrong place, and they certainly don't see what is going on in their own backyards while they're worrying and rubbing their hands together about what's going on elsewhere around the world. I thank you much for the input. We've got to take a break in just a moment. I do want to remind you, we are coming up into a cool spell here over the next several days. So my usual sales pitch for Tint Lady about the reducing the heat in your windows. Although, when it's a sunny day, it's still going to get hot from that convection. But also, window tints will help protect the bleaching of your curtains. Drapes in my family, my mother was a little highfalutin. Your furniture, your carpet, these are things, obviously, that are very important to you. You want to preserve them because you spend a lot of money on them. So what we'd like to recommend is you call Tint Lady or get in touch with them online. Set up a free estimate. They'll come out. They'll take a look at your home, your business. You can bring your automobile by, too, as well, at 1887 Highland Avenue East in Twin Falls. They're open Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., Saturday by appointment only. And the telephone number, 736-8469. That's 736-8469. TintLadyIdaho.com is the website, locally owned and operated, 20 years experience. Plus, don't squint. Get tint. Hey, I've got more coming up. I want to share some interviews with you from the county fair yesterday, Twin Falls County Fair. That's on the way. While I was in the studio about 7 o'clock, I came in to load some sound from the interviews I did at the fair yesterday. And just to give you a rundown of what's coming up, what I've got scheduled, I talked to a fellow in the barn where they have the miniature trains. And he was fascinating. He started talking with me as I was looking over one of the models, and we got talking about how he got involved with this when he was a kid, and I just thought, we got to talk. So I got some. In this day and age, you don't actually need the old tape recorder. I used to have to carry this big old heavy Marantz tape recorder around. I used to think it was going to give me premature bursitis because the strap would hang over my shoulder, and you'd walk around for hours, and that just would dig and dig and dig, and that heavy recorder and then the long microphone cord and the microphone. You know what you do today? You download an app, and on your telephone, it looks like a microphone. You hit tap. Well, you tap it. You don't have to hit it. You tap it, and all of a sudden it pops up. The icon opens up. It pops up, and it says record. You hit that button, and then the microphone on the phone, the telephone, which you use for talking, it becomes your recorder. You just sort of move the phone back and forth as you talk to someone. And each time I'd finish up an interview, I'd turn around and then I would just email it back to me at work. So when I came in this morning, it was all there. I'm just amazed by some of the new technology that's out there. And then I converted that to an MP3, and then I came into the studio, and then I converted that into our computer system here in the studio to share with you. And it's a wonderful way to do this. And I'll tell you what, a real convenience and a real time saver. Got a couple of things I want to mention though before we get to the fair stories. There was a story as I was getting ready, loading all of that tape into the computer about 7 o'clock this morning. I looked up and saw a story on Fox. I had the monitor on here in the newsroom, and the U.S. economy only added 173,000 jobs in August, far below what was actually expected. Far below. Now, the unemployment rate officially is down to 5.1, and they're saying, that's the best since 2008. I told you yesterday a survey was done, some research has been done, and it's been determined that the only jobs that have been created, 2/3 of the jobs that were lost by the people who were working at the margins. That is the people, a lot of times, they dropped out of high school, they found it difficult, they've got to work and scrape doing a lot of dirty jobs that the rest of us probably would never do. Well, 2/3 of those jobs have come back. But the jobs that were lost by high school and college graduates haven't. 7 years now into this. So all of the job creation is basically down at the minimum wage end. And that's it. And a lot of that isn't full-time. So then Fox put up a graphic that said, no, it's not 5.1, that's official, but the unofficial jobless rate, the real number, is over 10% still. And I would probably bargain that if you actually did a really serious head count and you counted all of the underemployed and everything else, we're still talking 1 in 5 Americans, if not more, are basically unemployed or underemployed, which is not a good sign 7 years after all of this started. And I started reading today Contra Corner, which I've been reading this every day now since Rush Limbaugh quoted David Stockman, former Reagan budget director, quoted him on his program a couple of months ago. And Stockman compiled some figures and said he thought the real unemployment rate was about 41%, which is simply outrageous. But if you look at all of the numbers of people who are receiving food stamps and other various benefits, more than half the population is getting some sort of a benefit now because of the serious consequences we've had with this economy. And then Canada went into recession. China looks like it's circling the drain. That's going to be one big boat going down to swamp all of the others. And then I came across a couple of things at that Contra Corner that David Stockman publishes today. Zero Hedge is writing that Mark Farber warns there are no safe assets anymore. Simply put, he explains, quote, because of modern central banking and repeated interventions with monetary policy, in other words, with quantitative easing all around the world by central banks, there is no safe asset anymore, unquote. Now, what does he mean by quantitative easing? Remember the stimulus package, and it was called Porculus by Limbaugh. But remember some of those projects? We had a couple of those. What they simply do is they print up money. Well, they don't any longer literally go down to the mint and say, you know what, we need to print up another stack of bills. It's all done electronically. And so it devalues your currency, of course. And they figure that flushing this through the economy will turn things around. And Mr. Farber went on to say the purchasing power of money is down. And he says, quote, who would rather focus on precious metals because they do not depend on the industrial demand as much as base metals or industrial commodities, unquote. And he says it's obvious the Chinese economy is growing, yet nowhere near where the Ministry of Truth is publishing. And he goes on to say, when I grew up in the 50s, it was safe to put your money in the bank on deposit. The yields were low, but it was safe. Nowadays, though, you don't know what will happen next in terms of purchasing power of money. What we know is that it's going down. And he went on to say, it's ludicrous to believe that you will create prosperity in a system by printing money that is economic sophism at its best. And Ron Paul chimed in as well with a column today. And Ron Paul says, again, that's all we've been doing is printing money and basically building a bubble on credit all over the world. And eventually that bubble is going to burst. And I found this. He says, right now, the refugee crisis that we see in Europe is a failure of government policies and a failure of central banking. In some ways, he says, I think we are in a great transition period. This cannot continue. The big danger is if the results of this failure are total poverty for more and more nations and total war, or hopefully we can wise up and say that these policies have failed. So I came across all of this today as I was getting ready to put the show together, and then the real kicker. This comes out of London's Daily Mirror, and it says, panicked super rich are buying bolt holes with private airstrips to escape if poor rise up. Now, I vaguely mentioned this on the program the other day, but I think it's a good follow-up to all of this. Hedge fund managers are buying up remote ranches and land in places like New Zealand to flee in event of widespread civil unrest. They figure they'll be safe. Nervous financiers from across the globe have begun purchasing landing strips, homes, and land so they can flee should people rise up. Robert Johnson, president of the Institute of New Economic Thinking, told people at the World Economic Forum in Davos that many hedge fund managers were already planning escapes. Mr. Johnson said the economic situation could soon become intolerable, as even in the richest countries, inequality was increasing. You're also, I believe, seeing this happen in places like Idaho and Montana and some of our neighboring states here in the Mountain West, because people feel that, the worst of this uprising would take place in places like Seattle and Los Angeles and Phoenix and Albuquerque. And so we're not, anywhere near those places. Still, it could happen just about anywhere. But if you're on a ranch in a secluded spot, on a dirt road in Idaho, here in the outback of Idaho, no one may know you're out there, and you just might get away with it. You have a small plane, you come in with a lot of supplies, you stack them all up, and you just wait it out, and you hope that it comes to an end. I've got more coming up in just a couple of minutes. I'd like to share with you, before we get out of this hour, an interview I did with a fellow named Carl Corbin yesterday at the Twin Falls County Fair. He works on model railroads, helps build them, and really intricate work. I was looking over some of the models with him yesterday. And he also does the miniatures. He doesn't use the larger trains. He does miniature models with miniature. He says he has to take his glasses off to do this. I know how that feels, even with my bifocals. But I'd like to share that with you if we get an opportunity in a few minutes. Also, I talked to some women who are working on some quilts. These things really show an artist's touch. And I did an interview with a woman for a few minutes about that too as well. And before we wrap up this hour, I'm going to try and share both of those. In the meantime, it's 8:30. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. 53. It's not going to be the warmest of days. By the way, the weekend's going to be a little cool, although the rain seems to be out of the forecast for now. So you don't even have to, I think, worry about breaking out in a sweat if you're at the fair over the weekend. You'll just simply be able to walk around, and it was beautiful out there yesterday. It was 66. Couldn't complain about that whatsoever. Donald Trump yesterday agreed that he would not pursue an independent candidacy for president if he didn't get the Republican nomination. When I first heard the news, I thought, this is not going to bode well for Trump among many of his supporters who really would like to give the Republican Party a smack right in the face. But in a moment, I'll tell you, it doesn't appear it's hurt him whatsoever. In fact, the Trump phenomenon just keeps growing and growing and growing. In the meantime, I wanted to mention High Desert Meat Processing. They've been on the air with us now for a few weeks right here at News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. They process one animal at a time. What you bring in is what you get back. You wouldn't, after all, want somebody else's animal. Darren Van Horn, owner of High Desert Meat Processing in Twin Falls, he has over 30 years' experience in the meat business. Visit High Desert Meat Processing on Facebook, and you can see reviews of other customers there, and they speak very highly of the business. Give High Desert Meat Processing a telephone call for all of your wild game and domestic processing needs, 734-9949. High Desert Meat does in-house smoking. Nothing gets shipped out. Specialty meats such as jerky, pepperoni, salami, summer sausage, breakfast sausage, kielbasa, Polish dogs, brats, hot dogs, and much more. USDA approved. Darren works closely with local beef growers and their programs to ensure quality meat. 734-9949. I went to the fair yesterday, and Benito said, "You better take your wallet." I said, "Well, I always take my wallet." He said, "You better put something in it." He said, "If you're going to want to eat out there," he said, "you're going to have a lot of options." And he started listing them off. Oh, I walked around that place, and it was just, well, it's a good thing that they invented a drool bucket. I just grabbed an old milk pail out of one of the barns and used that. It's one of the biggest attractions of going there now, isn't it? And I'm getting off track. I was talking about Donald Trump just a moment ago. Now, he signed a pledge yesterday that said that he would not mount an independent challenge if he doesn't get the Republican Party nomination for president. Get this. According to the Daily Caller, now he visited Mobile, Alabama recently, a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, right? Frontrunner Donald Trump has surged to nearly 40% in the latest Alabama Republican primary poll. In the last poll, he was supported by 30%. So he's jumped up nearly 10%. And then I came across this, too, as well. If Donald Trump had his way, it would be against the law to burn the American flag. People burning the flag, I don't like them in this country, Trump added. He's talking to the Daily Caller. Trump has said he switched from being pro-choice to being pro-life after knowing a family who decided not to abort a child and seeing that child become, in his words, total superstar. Trump says if he's elected president, he would live in the White House even though he is building one of the great hotels of the world right across the street on Pennsylvania Avenue. Not because of a sense of luxury, he said, only because of a sense that that is a very important symbol for the greatness of the United States. And his numbers are growing apparently nationwide still. One of the latest polls I've seen, and actually we've been somewhat quiet about him on the program this week, and I thought even the coverage of national media has been somewhat diminished by all of this. It's 8:35. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. You can reach our program. You can give us a telephone call at 736-0300, or you can drop me a line by email at bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. You're on the air.
Bill, I think what was really funny is that was brought up on one of the shows preceding yours is they shot themselves in the foot. Oh, it was Rush that they forced or pushed Trump, his opponent, to sign this. But basically, they just pledged to support him if he gets nominated.
Right. They can't back away now.
Yeah, so now what does he have to lose? Because if he wins, they have to support him according to their own deal. But on the same deal, I think we should get that same pledge signed by everybody in Congress and the Senate that's supposed to be Republican, that they will support us.
That would be nice. I thank you much for the call. Reince Priebus, who's the chairman of the Republican National Committee, I was at a picnic with him in 2011. And he's not quite the scoundrel that most of your leading Republicans are. He actually helped. He was the man behind the rise of Scott Walker in Wisconsin, which ought to tell you something. I think that he's actually he has been, I think, somehow able to sort of pull himself away from the McConnell and Boehner wing of the party and still keep his sanity. You're up next. It's 8:37.
Yes. Good morning, Bill. Donald Trump is a pretty shrewd guy, and he knows just exactly what to do to put these bloated politicians in their place. If he becomes president, he's going to surround himself with the brightest and most talented people that'll do the most to bring this country back to where it should be.
I agree. And I'm not necessarily endorsing him. I still have hope that Jindal will have a surge. Thanks for the call. Jindal will have a surge at some point, or even a Rand Paul. But I've got to tell you, I at least admire the bravado from Donald Trump, and I think it would serve him well on the world stage. He, of course, is being criticized by some Latinos, even though polls show his support growing there. On CNN yesterday, Communist News Network, Katrina Campins was being questioned. She's a Latino and former Apprentice contestant. She argues many Hispanics do support Donald Trump.
I get a lot of support from Hispanics that tell me we understand Katrina and we support Trump because we understand that that was not what he meant to say, that it was misconstrued by the media. But then there's Hispanics that truly believe everything that they hear and see in the media. And I'm telling you, as a Hispanic woman who has known Donald Trump since 2004, he is not anti-Hispanics. And I am so proud of my culture. I am so proud. I'm a Cuban American. My parents came here at a very young age, and I want legal immigration to work the right way. I don't want to have to pay for illegal immigrants. I don't want to have to pay tax dollars so that they can get better health care than I can as an American. That's the point here that Donald Trump's trying to make.
Yeah, you got a lot of people, who came here legally, or they're from Latin backgrounds, but their families may have been here even for centuries. They're looking around and saying, "What are you talking about? I'm not here to support the world. I'm having a tough enough time supporting myself." Coming up on 8:39, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. According to Wesley Pruden, editor emeritus of the Washington Times, Trump's decision was a no-brainer. He writes, if he had declined, it would have spoken volumes about how he, as a front runner, rendering the other candidates as mutts chasing the meat wagon, in his gut measures his chances in Iowa and New Hampshire. Now that he's the runaway front runner, he has to act like one. He says success is the curse of insurgents. And he goes on to say, a survey by Monmouth University of New Jersey finds Trump polling nationally at 30%. Oh, just up 4 points is all. And leading in every ideological category, he's the choice of the Tea Party, of the very conservative, of the somewhat conservative, of liberals, men, women, young people, and old people. And Pruden says it's a remarkable performance. Some sounds from the Twin Falls County Fair coming up in just a moment. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. My first visit there, I got to tell you, I absolutely loved it. I think I just haven't been to a fair in a long, long time, and it really, really made me feel like I was connecting with the past.